Welcome, MHP Rhino Nation, to another episode. Let's get dive deep into MHP's baby.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back to the deep dive.
Hello.
Now, normally we come to you almost drowning in source material, right? Piles of reports, data, historical texts.
Absolutely. We're usually sorting through a mountain.
Today is, well, it's different. Very different. It's actually quite exciting in its own way. We're doing a deep dive, but not into a huge stack of sources.
No, it's almost the opposite. It's like conceptual forensics, isn't it?
Totally. Our entire source material for this whole exploration is just two things.
2 data points. That's it.
The title of an article, The Grievance Engine, and where it was published, Psychology Today.
And that's our universe for today, extracting everything we possibly can from just that. Minimum material, maximum insight, hopefully.
Exactly. So our mission here is to dissect that title word by word and think about the context, Psychology Today, to basically reverse engineer the psychological mechanism it must be describing. We're trying to give you, the listener, a kind of blueprint before the actual article is even in front of you.
And, you know, this isn't just some academic game. In today's world, with so much information flying around, understanding how concepts are framed, the words chosen.
The nomenclature.
Precisely. That's often the quickest way to really get a handle on something complex. Why call it an engine and not, say, a grievance cycle? Why grievance, not complaint? These choices tell a story.
Right. So for you listening, think of this as learning to read the signposts. Especially in areas like psychology or behavioral science, the language itself is the first clue to understanding the landscape. We're diving deep into the system this title implies.
So where do we start? Let's take it apart piece by piece.
Okay, first piece, grievance. Now, casually, we might just think that means, being annoyed or having a complaint.
Right, like I have a grievance with this cold coffee.
Exactly. But in a psychological context, especially showing up in Psychology Today, that word grievance carries a lot more weight, doesn't it? What's the real distinction?
The absolute core difference, I think, is the element of injustice. A complaint is simply stating dissatisfaction, my coffee is cold. But a grievance that's rooted in a feeling of deep resentment over something perceived as unfair.
Unfair treatment, unfair action.
Yes. It implies you've been wronged, that some kind of moral or social contract has been violated. There's a sense of victimhood involved.
Okay, so let me try an example. My flight's delayed because of bad weather. That's annoying. It's a problem. I might complain.
Standard travel woes.
But if I start to believe the airline specifically delayed my flight, maybe because I complained last time or because they systemically disadvantage people like me, then it becomes a grievance.
Exactly. You've added that filter of perceived malice or systemic unfairness. It's intensely personal and emotionally charged.
And that emotional charge,
Yeah.
that's key, right? It's powerful.
Hugely powerful. And double-edged. On the one hand, grievances are absolutely necessary for change. Think about social movements, right? They often start with a shared grievance about genuine injustice. Without that feeling of being wronged, why would anyone push for reform?
That makes sense. You need that spark. So if grievances can be good, even essential, why frame it as part of an engine? That sounds, well, it sounds negative. Or at least mechanical and relentless.
That's the crux, isn't it? It's because grievances, when they become persistent, maybe detached from the original cause, or when they aren't channeled into action, they can shift. They stop being a catalyst for change and become, well, almost an identity.
An identity, how so?
The person stops focusing on solving the underlying problem and starts being the person who was wrong. The grievance itself becomes the central organizing principle. All that energy from the perceived injustice sort of tethers them psychologically to that moment, that feeling.
Wow. Okay,
Yeah.
and if it becomes an identity, it needs upkeep.
It needs fuel. It needs constant validation, a steady input of perceived wrongs to justify its own existence. Which leads us perfectly to the second word.
The engine.
The engine, yeah. This is where the title really takes off, I think, because engine implies something very different from just a feeling or even a recurring thought pattern.
Right. It's not passive. It's not a grievance puddle or grievance cloud.
Exactly. It's not a cycle, not a spiral even, an engine. What does an engine do? It requires fuel, it needs ignition, it generates power, and crucially, it produces a consistent, maybe even measurable output. It's systematic, it's designed.
It suggests intention, or at least a highly structured process.
Yeah.
Not just random bad feelings popping up.
Precisely. The word engine forces us to think about optimization. It suggests the production of grievances is somehow efficient. We're not talking about occasional irritation, we're talking about an assembly line for resentment.
A finely tuned machine, maybe even self-correcting, that takes some raw input, a small slight, a perceived disadvantage, and churns out high-grade indignation.
That's a great way to put it. High-grade indignation as the primary output.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting for me, this title. Does it suggest the engine runs on external stuff? Like the world just keeps feeding it bad things?
Right.
Or is the engine primarily internal? Is it about how our brains process things?
That's the core tension, isn't it? The article itself would have to clarify that. But
No.
the context, Psychology Today, and the word engine itself, they strongly hint towards an internal mechanism being primary.
Why engine specifically?
Because an engine is usually a contained system. Yes, external events might provide the initial spark, the raw material, maybe, but the efficiency, the relentless production, the optimization, that suggests internal architecture. Think about it. If the world suddenly became perfectly fair tomorrow,
Right.
a truly efficient internal grievance engine wouldn't just shut down. It would likely find unfairness in how quickly things improved or why it didn't happen sooner, or maybe focus on past unfairness with even more intensity. The engine itself generates the need.
So putting it all together then, a grievance engine is likely describing a psychological system, maybe with social or even technological components feeding into it, that's designed, or has perhaps evolved, to very efficiently and continually turn the experience of specific injustices,
Real or perceived.
right, into a pervasive, structured, predictable state of ongoing grievance. It's a machine built for keeping the feeling alive, not for resolving it.
That transition from a sporadic complaint to a structured, predictable emotional output, that's the power move suggested by the title alone. The engine's success is measured by its consistent RPMs of resentment.
Okay, let's bring in the context now. If the title grievance engine is like the chassis and the blueprint, then the fact it's in Psychology Today is like the user manual, telling us the key components are probably cognitive or behavioral.
Absolutely critical point.
All right.
Because it's published there, we know we're primarily looking at mental machinery, not just, say, a political analysis or an economic argument, though those might be triggered.
Right. The focus has to be on psychological mechanisms.
The fuel for this engine isn't just bad luck out there in the world. The implication is that the fuel is processed, maybe even generated, by things like cognitive biases, mental habits, the amazing, sometimes frustrating ways our brains work.
What's fascinating here is the location, the source. It immediately points us towards specific psychological parts, the high-efficiency components that could plausibly keep this kind of engine running systematically. We need things that turn isolated negative events into self-feeding loops.
Right. If we were trying to build a machine, like intentionally design something to maximize human dissatisfaction based on perceived wrongs, what parts would we need? I think there are 3 core psychological mechanisms that seem like prime candidates. They feed each other beautifully in a dark sort of way.
Okay, lay them out first. Component number 1.
Let's start with what keeps the engine hot, what ensures it never really cools down. That would be rumination.
Rumination. Okay, most of us have felt that, right? That awful mental hamster wheel replaying negative stuff over and over.
It's more than just remembering something bad. Rumination is the process of continuously focusing on the distress itself, or on the perceived causes and consequences of negative experiences. Think of it as the engines. Fuel pump and heat exchanger combined.
Ooh, I like that. Fuel pump and heat exchanger. Why?
It doesn't just hold the fuel, the memory of the grievance. It actively circulates it, keeps it hot, keeps it pressurized. Instead of thinking about an unfair event once, say, okay, that was unfair because of X, and then moving to solve X or accept it.
The ruminator replays it endlessly.
1,000 times, pulling apart every detail, exploring every possible negative meaning, extracting the maximum emotional pain from every angle. What if I had said this? Why did they do that? What does it mean about me? What will happen next because of it?
The efficiency is kind of terrifying when you put it like that. It bypasses the normal fading of memory, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Something from years ago can feel raw, like it just happened.
Precisely. It keeps the grievance emotionally vivid now. That constant internal heat is exactly what the engine needs to maintain its operating speed. It's incredibly costly in terms of cognitive load and emotional well-being.
Yeah, exhausting.
Totally exhausting. But for the grievance engine itself, rumination provides stability. It guarantees a renewable energy source generated internally.
Okay, wait. If rumination is the fuel and the heat, what stops it from just burning out? Don't you eventually run out of angles on the same old injustice? It seems like you'd hit diminishing returns of misery.
Good point. You need fresh input, or at least validation that the old input is still relevant. And that brings us to the second crucial component, This acts like the engine's highly selective input regulator.
Input regulator.
Yes, confirmation bias. The engine knows it needs validation to keep running smoothly, to justify those high RPMs of resentment. So confirmation bias ensures it actively seeks out, notices, and remembers information that confirms the pre-existing sense of injury or injustice. Ah, okay. So confirmation bias is like the air intake filter on this engine, but it's designed to let in only the toxic air and filter out anything fresh or clean.
Perfect analogy. If the engine's core belief is the world or this specific person or this system is fundamentally unfair to me, then confirmation bias scans all incoming data news articles, social media posts, a weird look from a colleague, a delayed email response, anything for evidence that supports that belief.
Right.
And crucially, it filters out or dismisses information that contradicts it. Evidence of kindness, complexity, mitigating factors, potential for resolution that gets ignored or explained away.
I can totally picture that. Someone with a running grievance engine gets a flat tire. A normal response might be, ugh, bad luck, gotta fix this.
Right. Annoying, but random.
But the grievance engine, primed by confirmation bias, processes it as, see, more proof. The universe is actively conspiring against me. This just confirms everything I already knew about how things always go wrong for me. The flat tire isn't just a flat tire, it's evidence validating the entire system. That's the dark genius of it. It's a system optimized to find malice, to find injustice. It ensures a continuous supply of high-quality, validated fuel for the rumination furnace. Rumination keeps the grievance hot. Confirmation bias ensures only fuel that supports the grievance gets in. It prevents unwelcome truths like maybe it was just a nail, or maybe you're actually quite lucky in other ways from disrupting the system.
Okay, so we've got the heat from rumination and the validated fuel from confirmation bias. But what keeps the engine running, even if, objectively, things start getting better? What ensures it never reaches a state of, like, satisfaction or resolution? There must be something else keeping the pressure up.
Ah, there is. The third piece, arguably the most inexhaustible source of dissatisfaction for this engine, that's social comparison theory.
Comparing ourselves to others.
Constantly. Grievance rarely thrives in a vacuum. It's often fueled not by absolute deprivation, but by the perception of being disadvantaged relative to others. Social comparison acts like the engine's pressure valve, but one that's designed to never fully release the pressure, always maintaining a level of frustration.
A pressure valve guaranteeing eternal frustration.
Wow. That's bleakly brilliant. Why is social comparison so perfect for this engine?
Because it's endlessly renewable. You literally can never win the comparison game if the engine doesn't want you to.
Yeah.
Even if the person running this engine achieves significant success, gets the promotion, buys the bigger house, whatever.
Right.
The engine using social comparison just shifts the benchmark. It finds someone else who got a better promotion or a bigger house, or who seemed to achieve it with less effort, or who looks happier on Instagram. That disparity isn't seen as motivation or just variation. It's processed as more evidence of unfairness. Why them and not me? Why was it easier for them?
So the engine hijacks the natural human tendency to, see how we're doing compared to the group and optimizes it purely for generating resentment. The target is always moving, ensuring the engine never reaches a state where it could logically say, okay, things are actually pretty fair now. Put them together, and you have a terrifyingly effective loop. Rumination keeps the past injustice burning hot internally. Confirmation bias filters the present, letting in only validating evidence. And social comparison ensures the future always looks relatively disadvantageous. It's a closed system, almost perfectly designed for self-perpetuating misery.
This loops back to the scale question again. Is psychology today likely talking about this as just an individual pattern, a personal psychological struggle? Or is it hinting at how these individual engines get, plugged into a larger grid?
Given the times we live in, and the likely reason this topic feels relevant enough for psychology today to cover, it almost has to be talking about both levels. The individual cognitive pattern, the rumination, the bias, the comparison that's the fundamental unit, the single piston maybe?
Okay.
But in our current age, especially with technology, these individual mechanisms are incredibly easy to co-opt and amplify. The internal engine is basically offered a supercharger by the external environment.
So things like social media algorithms or certain kinds of media outlets, They don't necessarily create the initial grievance, but they provide the perfect infrastructure to boost the engine's performance.
Exactly. They can connect lots of individual, maybe low-level personal engines running on similar grievances.
And wire them together into a massive, high-voltage network of shared outrage.
Right. The collective engine runs hotter, faster, and is much, much harder to ignore or contain.
Okay, so we've looked at the potential parts, the fuel sources. Now, the big engineering question. What's the output? What does this grievance engine actually produce?
Well, thinking logically, the output can't be resolution, right?
No, because if it resolved the grievance, the engine would stop. Its purpose seems to be perpetual motion.
So the output has to be something that in some way feeds back into the system or at least sustains its operation. The most obvious outputs are probably sustained resentment, anger, maybe bitterness.
Yeah, and increased polarization seems like a big one. The world gets neatly divided. People who understand and validate my grievance, allies, fellow engine operators, and people who don't, the enemy, the dismissive, part of the problem.
Absolutely. That polarization, while maybe emotionally draining, strongly reinforces the engine's core premise and makes it harder to consider alternative viewpoints. It locks you in.
But is there a less obvious output?
Yeah.
Something that might explain why someone would, consciously or unconsciously, keep this engine running despite the misery? You mentioned identity earlier.
Yes. I think that's potentially the most profound and probably central output the article would explore. Identity construction.
Tell me more about that. How can churning out unhappiness actually be beneficial in a twisted way?
Because for some, maybe many, the grievance engine doesn't just produce negative feelings. It produces a powerful sense of meaning, purpose, even community. Identifying as someone who is perpetually wronged, as a victim of systemic unfairness.
It provides answers.
It provides clarity, doesn't it? It explains failures. It wasn't my fault. The system is rigged. It justifies negative emotions. Of course I'm angry, son. Look what was done to me. Yeah. It defines who you are in opposition to the perceived oppressors. And it instantly offers a community, others running the same engine, validating each other's output. Being wronged becomes almost a calling.
A vocation of victimhood. Wow, and if that's your identity?
Then any attempt to actually resolve the underlying issue or suggest maybe it's not that bad or that you have some agency that's not perceived as help. It's perceived as an existential threat, an attack on your very sense of self, on the meaning framework the engine provides. You end up fighting not just for justice anymore, but fighting for the right to keep the grievance alive because your identity depends on it.
That's chillingly plausible. And does this identity then affect behavior? Does it produce other outputs?
I think it can lead to something we could call moral licensing through victimhood.
Moral licensing. How does that work here?
Well, if the engine is constantly humming, constantly validating the idea that you are fundamentally and systematically wronged by the world or by specific groups,
right,
it can create a sense that the normal rules don't apply to you. Since the world is unfair to you and you're the designated victim, perhaps your own actions, even if they're aggressive, unfair to others, polarizing, destructive, feel justified. They become necessary countermeasures against the perceived oppressive system.
So the engine isn't just consuming fuel. Its exhaust is actively polluting the social environment, but the driver feels righteous about it because the engine tells them they're the victim.
Exactly. The engine produces unhappiness, yes, but it also produces a feeling of righteousness, which is a very powerful psychological reward, maybe the most powerful.
Okay, this connects directly to the so what for today.
Yeah.
Why would Psychology Today publish this now? It feels like you're saying the modern world, especially the digital world, has basically perfected the conditions for this engine.
It feels that way, doesn't it? The modern information ecosystem seems almost purpose-built to fuel the grievance engine. Think about algorithms on social media platforms.
It's their goal.
Engagement, right. Keeping your eyes on the screen. They don't really care about truth or nuance or resolution. They care about what keeps you clicking, scrolling, reacting.
And what drives engagement better than strong emotions.
Exactly. Especially outrage, validation of your group, and the feeling of persistent injustice. These things generate very high, very sustained engagement.
So if the external engine, the tech platform, is optimized for engagement, it learns to feed the internal engine precisely the fuel it craves.
It's a perfect codependent feedback loop. The algorithm exploits your confirmation bias by serving you content specifically tailored to validate your existing sense of being wronged. It connects you with others running the same grievance program. It amplifies signals of injustice and filters out complexity or counter-evidence because those things are less engaging.
We could even use mechanical terms for that loop, couldn't we? The platform sort of measures the idle speed of your personal grievance engine, how quickly you react to things.
Mm-hmm.
And then it tweaks the fuel mixture, the information feed, to keep that idle speed high if you start to calm down, if the engine slows.
The algorithm injects a high-octane dose of something particularly outrageous or validating to spool it back up again.
Engineered emotional instability. Designed thermal runaway. The internal engine provides the heat, rumination. The external digital engine bumps in pure oxygen. Optimize outrage content.
And the goal isn't progress or understanding. The goal is just to keep the needle in the red zone, because that's where the attention and often the money is. The grievance engine, in this view, isn't just a personal failing. It's a highly profitable mechanism when scaled up.
Which really underlines the point. Some systems seem built not to solve problems, but to keep the feeling of the problem intensely alive.
A masterpiece of dark psychological engineering, perhaps.
Okay, so for us, for the listener trying to navigate this implies we need some personal diagnostics. How can you tell if your own way of consuming information, your own thought patterns, are maybe unintentionally feeding a personal grievance engine?
That's the practical takeaway, isn't it? The diagnostics should probably focus on the efficiency and the output, not just whether you feel bad sometimes. First, maybe check for habitual outrage seeking.
Meaning?
Are you consistently drawn to, or do you prioritize news sources, social feeds, or conversations that primarily confirm your worst fears and feelings of unfairness? Especially over sources that might offer more complex, less emotionally satisfying, maybe even slightly boring perspectives or signs of slow progress.
Right. Is your information diet optimized for indignation? Second diagnostic.
Check the cognitive load. Where is most of your mental and emotional energy going? If a huge chunk of it is spent ruminating about large-scale systemic issues you feel powerless over, or replaying past slights endlessly without moving towards any kind of resolution or acceptance.
You might be fueling one of these high-efficiency engines.
And you're paying the price in terms of mental bandwidth and emotional exhaustion. The engine is running hot, and it's burning you as fuel.
Okay.
And third,
check the output utility. The energy generated by your sense of injustice. Where does it actually go? Is it channeled into constructive action? Even small things like learning more, changing a personal behavior, setting a boundary, engaging in respectful dialogue? Or does it mostly just cycle back internally, leading to more feelings of helplessness, anger, exhaustion, and polarization?
That's a key distinction. Critical analysis of real injustice should ideally lead outward towards solutions, however small. The grievance engine seems to lead inward, just reinforcing the state itself.
Exactly. The engine thrives on simple black and white narratives, us versus them, always unfair. Complexity is like throwing sand in the gears.
Which brings us back to that crucial question. How do we tell the difference? How do we separate the vital work of identifying and fighting real systemic injustice, which takes effort and nuance, from slipping into the easier, more validating, but ultimately paralyzing mechanism of the perpetual grievance engine, which offers that seductive sense of identity and immediate certainty?
The full article hopefully delves into that distinction, but just understanding the concept of the engine, knowing that resentment can be systematized, fueled by our own minds, and amplified by outside forces, that awareness is the first step, isn't it?
Yeah.
It lets us recognize when maybe we're not the driver of our thoughts, but just fuel being consumed. Hashtag tag tag outro.
Yeah, this whole conceptual dive, just based on the title of the grievance engine, really forces you to confront something uncomfortable, I think. That our emotional responses, especially resentment, aren't always just spontaneous reactions. They can become systematic, optimized, fueled by our internal wiring and by the systems we interact with daily.
It's a stark warning, really, that the default setting for our minds, particularly in this age of optimized outrage, might actually lean towards maintaining misery, because it can feel purposeful or validating in the short term.
It's just such powerful wording, grievance engine.
Right.
It shifts the frame entirely, doesn't it? Away from just, I feel wronged, towards systems thinking. It makes you realize that if a system is incredibly efficient at producing a particular output, like sustained resentment,
then the system is working exactly as intended, or as it has evolved. It's not broken, it's doing its job.
And the whole point of understanding how an engine works, well, it's usually so you can figure out how to operate it, maintain it, or, crucially, find the off switch, the emergency brake.
Right. If we can recognize that a system, internal or external, is efficiently churning out grievances, the knowledge we've hopefully unpacked today gives us a choice. Do we keep feeding it fuel? Do we become its predictable output?
Or do we try to step back, maybe even become the engineer of our own cognitive processes, deciding what fuel we use and what output we aim for?
So here's a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to maybe mull over, based purely on this idea of the engine. If this grievance engine runs best on pure, high-octane outrage and simple narratives of injustice, what's one small, maybe even boring or inconvenient, piece of counter-evidence you could actively look for today?
Ooh, I like that. What kind of counter-evidence?
A nuance that slightly complicates the U.S. versus them? A small sign of progress that muddies the everything is always terrible narrative? A viewpoint from the other side that isn't entirely crazy, even if you disagree with it? Something complex that the engine is optimized to ignore?
Find a little bit of sand to throw in the gears, essentially, just to see what happens.
Exactly. Seek the complexity. Lower the idle speed, even just for a moment.
Something definitely worth thinking about. Thank you for joining us on this very conceptual deep dive.